So one of the things we've talked quite a bit about sort of counselling and therapy, and it might be worth unpicking kind of what are the different types, and I suppose a lot of people use counselling and therapy interchangeably.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of maybe what the similarities are, the differences, the different types.
Yeah.
Would that be?
So if we think about it as a kind of spectrum, the first kind of psychological support that an individual might be securing is DIY support.
Okay.
Some individuals who suffer from depression or anxiety, for all kinds of reasons, are on the internet looking for materials, and also social media, which is really important nowadays. Now, on the internet there are some fantastic, very high quality materials. I often refer my clients to read some of these materials. Some of them are extremely well written for individuals who are suffering from certain challenges at a given point in time. Equally, there's a lot of very bad stuff on the internet, not because it's out of date, though it often is, but because it's written from a certain point of view, trying to sell you something. It's maybe written in a culturally inappropriate way for your own circumstances, and some of it's very expensive and not necessarily a good investment. So for all the reasons that stuff on the internet is not great, although there are some gems out there, there's a lot of bad quality stuff as well. Social media, again, social media nowadays is certainly with many of the young people nationally that I've read cases about, social media can be a real cause of mental ill health. The tendency of compare and despair. When individuals see these photographs on Instagram of someone that they might identify with, maybe actually someone from their class at school or from their work environment showing some amazing dress or shirt or sporting gear that I've just bought, it can make you feel as though, well, where's my life going? Why am I not able to do that?
Yeah, you're aspiring to something you've seen on social media.
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. And of course, unfortunately, there's a lot of cyberbullying and trolling that goes on. The ones we get to hear about nationally are big profile individuals who attract controversy perhaps, or through no fault of their own, attract a lot of criticism. But on a local level, on certain social media sites, there can be a lot of criticism of individuals, or individuals being isolated. So it can be a very negative dynamic around anxiety and depression. Having said that, there are some very, very good sources of information in social media. All the major counselling groups and national bodies have their own social media feeds which link to new publications they might have, new guidance, notes on things. And so there is good stuff there too.
And I suppose one other dimension, and again it can be sort of fairly generational, but I know some of my friends, particularly in the kind of 20s or 30s, who use certain types of social media connections as their support network. So often they'll talk about their good days if they're having bad days, and the fact that people reach out and say, oh, I hope you're doing all right, or just having some connections.
Yeah.
There are some people for whom it can be quite helpful, but I think it's really good, as you said, to understand, okay, what's the dynamic of social media? Is it a place where people are getting support, or is it a place where when people go and they've spent an hour on social media, they come back and they're more anxious or they're more depressed? Or,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the same person can experience both those emotions in the same afternoon.
Yeah.
It comes back to what you were saying about journaling. I mean, if you are to use social media as part of your attempt to recover from mental illness, it's a good idea to track what you're doing and what works for you. To be cautious, because you're vulnerable, and to try and make the decision that's right for you. One thing we need to be aware of is that individuals who make that courageous decision to say, I do have a mental health issue, I do want to get support, it's not always clear cut about how other individuals in their network or in professional context will react. I do a little exercise in some of my workshops where I say to individuals, well, you know, I'm not going to ask you this because it's not appropriate, but if I was to ask you, hands up anyone here who in the past 10 years has asked their doctor to prescribe them antibiotics, would you be happy to raise your hand? And I said, yeah, I would be happy to raise my hand. I said, okay, if I was to ask you, and I'm not asking you, I don't want to invade your privacy, but if I was to say to you, hands up anyone who's asked the doctor for antidepressants, would you be as ready to do it? No. There's still a degree of nervousness about letting people know that you have a psychological difficulty. Now, when you go to the GP, she or he will quite possibly prescribe medication. They will ask you some questions in a structured way about your appetite, your sleep, your mood, some behaviours. Is it affecting your work? Is it affecting your social life? Ideally, what do you think you would like to achieve? What would you like to do next? If they recommend a talking therapy, such as cognitive behavioural therapy, they will explain to you that the waiting list is quite long. It can be 3 to 6 months, in some parts of the country longer. And there are criteria about where you go on the waiting list. It's not first come, first served. It does depend upon the severity of your difficulty and the character of it, but you are looking at a lengthy wait. The other alternatives are that you get a recommendation from your GP, or you find a charitable therapy service. These tend to be in the larger cities or larger towns. They're not so well known, but they're very high quality. I've worked in a couple of them myself. There's good training. People are qualified or qualifying, and they have a supervisory structure there. So, one of the things which the therapist will ask you or explain to you in the first session is just to identify whether you have any special needs or any particular medical issues, such as perhaps epilepsy, just in case if you have an episode in the session that they are alert to that, and make sure that you understand fire evacuation procedures, as you might expect. However, there are special things they will bring to your attention. First of all, they will have a contract. It's not like a legal contract, but it's just to lay out responsibilities and rights and expectations on both sides. And it will cover areas such as confidentiality. Pretty much everything you discuss with your therapist is confidential, but there are exceptions.
What would some of the exceptions be in that?
Yeah, the main exception would be if the therapist believed that you were going to harm someone else or yourself, they would have to inform the authorities. If they have a concern that you might be doing something to yourself, but they're not sure, they would raise it with you first, in the first instance, but they want to make sure that you're protected. And they have a duty of care towards you, and they have a legal responsibility to others if you were to say that you were going to harm someone else. Other exceptions would include if the therapist believed that you were involved in violating any young person's privacy and legal rights, particularly around safeguarding issues, sexual inappropriate behaviour and so on. They have a responsibility to protect that child. If it's a live issue, they would be required to tell the police. Similarly, for issues around human trafficking or issues around terrorism, they are required to inform the police. But anything else, and also money laundering, I understand, is also something that's been added to the list recently. But other things about any minor offences in the past, or anything which you're doing which may be antisocial or recreational drug use, etc., that's a safe space. They will not break the confidentiality.
And they'd normally go through that with you and go, look, so you're aware. And that's certainly something, as a nurse, you often encounter, and you say it's confidentiality is a principle. It's a very sacrosanct principle in any kind of healing relationships, but also there are certain exceptions, just as long as you can.
Absolutely. And they'll also give you expectations about attendance. So each service in a charity will have different rules, but generally speaking, if you are going to miss a session, you have to notify them at least 24 hours in advance, and that's okay. If you are regularly cancelling sessions, they'll ask you about your commitment to the service, and is this the right thing for you? Are you ready for this right now? Is that an issue you want to talk about? The fact that you're not attending as often as you said you would be, because there will be waiting lists, and they have a responsibility to make sure that they are prioritising the service. But they'll normally be quite flexible. They just want to make sure that you recognise your responsibility there. They'll also make sure that you understand that the service is free, but that you're welcome to make a donation. They won't push that, but it is something which they will bring to your attention. That's perfectly normal. Towards the end of the therapeutic sessions, normally if it is to be 12, around about 10, they'll say, well, we're coming towards the end of our sessions now. Do you think that you would like to extend them? Do you think 12 would be about right? What are the key issues you'd like to consider? You will have had at round about session 6 a kind of interim check-in to see how you're benefiting from the therapy, to ask what you are finding beneficial, what aspects are not working, and then that will be revisited round about session 10. The final session is normally a kind of discharge session, and the last few weeks will cover issues about resilience and becoming your own therapist to some extent.
Having an action plan going forward.
Absolutely, no, absolutely. And there are some specific resources that you probably will have passed on to you just to help you. Now, in charitable services, they normally don't say, come back in 6 months' time and see how you're getting on. They will not normally do that. So don't be surprised if they don't invite you back. It's not about you, it's just the way the service normally works. So that is the charitable service. Often you'll have students who are already qualified in a basic level, but they're training for a higher award. There won't be anyone sitting in the room with you monitoring them, but quite often they will record the session with your permission because they want to take that back to supervision. And some of the experienced counsellors will also do that because they have responsibility to maintain their professional expertise, and everyone's monitored and checked. So they might ask if it's okay to record a session. It's important to understand that no one's judging your contributions. They're listening to what the therapist is saying, how they're looking after you, are they asking the right questions, and is the session being managed in the right kind of way. So those are the things that you can expect to happen if you go to a charity for therapeutic counselling support.
So we've done NHS, we've done charitable and kind of social enterprise. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So if we talk about private counselling, private counselling is something which is very common nowadays. It's obviously a fee. It's payable. Many of the things that are true about the charitable sessions are true of private practice, but there are some things that are slightly different. First of all, you pay for it, of course, and as part of the contract around confidentiality, about commitment, about turning up, and about safeguarding and so on, there will be a contractual element to the financial side of things. Different therapists have different arrangements nowadays. With the internet and online services, you can pay online and so on, but your therapist will explain how that works when you get to that point. Again, they will have rules about not turning up. Normally, if you don't turn up, or if you don't give warning more than 48 hours in advance, they will require you to pay for the service anyway. And that's kind of the way it should be, because if you book a session and you don't do it, it's too late to have someone else come in, so they're losing that bit of their income. Private therapists very often have their counselling work carried out in their own private home, so there'll be rules about respecting their home, but it'll be a very relaxed atmosphere. Others have specialist clinics, and often there's a receptionist, and they'll come in, and it's a 50-minute session, and towards the end the therapist will say, well, we're coming towards the end of our time now, is there anything else you want to add? The bookings will not necessarily be the same time every week. It's much more flexible, and they'll ask you, when would you like to have your next session, so you want to think about that a little bit, but we'll encourage you to have regular sessions. Towards 12 sessions again, they'll ask you if you want to continue. Sometimes individuals who feel like they've made progress and they've been successful in the therapy still want to see their therapist maybe once a month for like top-up sessions and just do almost like coaching. But for both the charitable organisation and the private organisation, you can, if you're the client, ask if you can bring your carer into one of the sessions. In the charity context, I would say that they would be a little bit more, they would be prepared to do that. They just want to make sure what the motivation is, and just to double check you're not being put under pressure
Yeah.
by the carer who wants to be a bit nosy. Say, what do you talk about between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock on a Tuesday with that person? So they will be a little bit more cautious about.
I suppose
exactly what to do.
conversely, that someone brings in and goes, see, my counsellor or my therapist has said X, and almost as a way of adding more pressure onto it. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
It does work both ways. Whereas in a private setting, that would be a little bit more flexible, and they would say, well, that's fine. Yes, that's fine. You can come along to the next session. What would you like to make sure that we cover? What would you like to get from it? How would you define a successful session where you're here, I'm here as always, but your husband's here too?
Yeah.
What would be good for you? Okay, so there's that. The other areas here for carers from the point of view is that therapists nowadays are very clear about the fact that they, particularly in my area, cognitive behavioural therapy, there's a lot of assignments outside of the 1 hour session or the 50-minute session. They want the client to be active and doing activities or thinking about things outside of that relatively small part of the week. And if the partner is positive and supportive, then they can be mobilised to be a supporter. Now, in the broader sweep of things, we have the term counselling and therapy, counsellor and therapist. And there's a lot of overlap there. Recently in the UK, it's become a big debate because one of the large professional recognition organisations is trying to firm up on that distinction, and not everyone likes the way that's being done. But generally speaking, in the UK, a counsellor is someone who may have many years' experience, a lot of expertise and a lot of training, but it would also cover those individuals who've got limited training and maybe are counselling as part of a larger job that they do. Yeah, it's not a protected term in the UK. Anyone can call themselves a counsellor. Anyone can call themselves a psychotherapist. It's not a protected term. To the extent that they are different, a counsellor would tend to be eclectic in their approach. They would try different approaches. There's a lot of very, very high quality person-centred counsellors in the UK. It's very popular, which I'm not a person-centred counsellor, but the approach is to kind of take your lead from the client, help the client talk and explore, and wait until the client is ready to address certain issues, to make sure the client's always comfortable about the next steps. Maybe a little bit of challenge, but generally it is, as it says, person-centred. It's not treatment-centred, it's not diagnostic-centred, it's not therapist-centred, it's not protocol-centred, it's not medication-centred, it's person-centred. And there's lots of different types within that heading. But it means that in the session, it's a lot more open-ended in the questions and the discussions. It might kind of just be a conversation that on the surface isn't really going anywhere, but it's actually very helpful to the client. Psychotherapy, particularly in the UK, is cognitive behavioural therapy, CBT. It is the approach which has the strongest evidence base about what works. A lot of randomised controlled trials where you're comparing CBT with being on a waiting list or medication or something else. So everything's the same apart from the CBT. So it helps you, it's never cut and dry, but it helps you understand what's the CBT doing that isn't present in the other things. So CBT very much focused on the here and now rather than the past. Very much, yes, it begins with the person, but it applies protocols no matter who the individual is. One of the key ideas is that our experience of life is that events occur and we have emotional reaction to those events, and what we overlook is the power of the thinking that we do about those events. That's what drives the emotions. Our thinking can be biased, and so the job of the therapist is to help the individual reflect on those biases to see where they're being unduly pessimistic. For example, people suffering from anxiety systematically overestimate the probability that the bad thing they're worrying about will happen. They also systematically overestimate the negative impact of that thing were it to happen, and they systematically underestimate their ability to cope if that thing were to happen. But by taking logs, taking journals, helping the individual write down what it is they think is going to happen, assign a probability to it, and assign on a score of 1 to 10 how negative it would be, and then to find out in the following, well, did the thing happen? Did it happen at all? How negative was it? And that mismatch between the individual's assumptions and what actually is happening is the powerful lever that opens up new ways of thinking. So the other thing about cognitive behavioural therapy is that strong emphasis on, as I say, on thinking, but as part of a system of behaviours, emotional reactions and bodily reactions as well.
So we talked about person-centred therapists, we talked about cognitive behavioural therapists. Are there any other sort of therapy disciplines that people might kind of hear about? Or?
Yeah, particularly in London and the South East, though, you have psychodynamic therapy, which comes from the Freudian tradition, very much changed nowadays, new ideas being brought into play, particularly the link between language and the unconscious. But the key features there are, the underlying theory is that human distress, depression, anxiety is caused by repressed experiences and conflicts. Some of the behaviours that people engage in are defence mechanisms. So you might feel negative about yourself, but you go around blaming other people, for example. Rationalisation, where you justify a behaviour in a certain sort of way to make it more palatable. The underlying idea of a tension between the id, which is the passionate, animalistic, hugely voracious part of us that wants to have everything pleasurable and wants to have it now, and the superego, which is more like a conscience, maybe a social, even religious kind of supervisor that tries to control those passions of the id. And then in the middle you've got the ego, which is like the rational side, trying to balance those two impulses. I mean, that's more of a traditional Freudian, and people build on it, but that's where the underlying ideas come from.
And a lot of that therapy is about trying to get people to express those ideas, their experiences, to get them all sort of out in the open.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And it can be quite upsetting for the individual client, because they will want to delve into childhood experiences and memories, how they are impacting on the individual now, trying to track the legacy of emotional trauma and the wounds from childhood. So it can be quite distressing, and if you're a carer and your person is going into Freudian therapy, Freudian therapists are very skilled at managing it, but you have to be aware that certain things will be opened up which could be distressing in a way that would not be typical of cognitive behavioural therapy or even person-centred counselling. Some of the distinctive aspects of psychodynamic counselling is that, generally speaking, it is very expensive. It is more or less open-ended. There are instances of people being in therapy for 20 years. They may get over certain issues that they were dealing with when they first approached the therapist, and those issues may or may not, but may be resolved, but they maintain that relationship with the therapist for many, many years. Now, that's not necessary, but it is something that does happen in a way that would never happen in cognitive behavioural therapy or person-centred.
So I suppose one of the challenges is, you've gone to the GP, he or she said, look, there may be quite a long time for NHS therapy, there are charitable organisations nearby, they may or may not be available. There's private therapy and private counselling, but obviously that depends a bit on people's means. Once they've sort of made a decision, how do they go about sort of choosing a therapist, I suppose, or choosing a counsellor? Are there any sort of standards they need to look for?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. First of all, you want to make sure that your therapist is registered by the appropriate professional body. Okay. So in the UK, anyone who's a cognitive behavioural therapist should be and will be registered with the BABCP.
BABCP.
That's the British Association of Behavioural and Cognitive Psychotherapists.
Okay.
Thanks for asking. And the other big organisation, it covers person-centred, and no matter what your orientation is, there's a place for you in the BACP, which is the British
Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy.
So it's an acronym SUP here. And for Freudian psychoanalysis, which is quite rare, to be honest, They have their own quite small organisations.
I hope you found this course helpful. At FCC, we're committed to providing courses and training for unpaid carers, and these courses are completely free. If you found this helpful, you could support our work in 3 ways. Please recommend it to any friends or people that you know that will benefit from the courses. Please consider sharing it on social media. And if you can, please consider donating. There are buttons on the website where you can donate £1, £2, £5, and every pound that you donate will make a huge difference by helping us make more and more care courses completely free to carers. Thank you very much.